Thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Saurabh Gupta, and we are really glad to have you today. This is a conversation that's quite interesting to me and Puneet. We always felt that there are a lot of discussions that happen about privacy laws, and there are conversations that happen about technology, and we wanted to bring this together. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'll start with a disclaimer. This is not legal advice. We do work in this domain, but none of us is a lawyer. None of us runs a law firm. It's just purely our point of view. With that out of the way, my name is Saurabh Gupta. I am the founder and CEO of Cloud Compliance. We are a Salesforce App Exchange partner. I'm a technologist by trade, enterprise architect. I was at Salesforce for about 7.5 years. I am based in Chicago, happen to be in Pune, India tonight, or early morning, but that's my background. So with that, a little bit about who we are. We are a Salesforce App Exchange partner. We are exclusively focused in Salesforce data privacy and security. So we build products for Salesforce customers. If you're a customer, you can get our apps from the Salesforce App Exchange for privacy and security. Everything we do is 100% on the Salesforce platform, and we primarily focus on large, complex kind of Salesforce orgs. We are very fortunate to have customers across 4 continents, and they love the fact that you can go live with us in weeks. So that's a little bit about us. Some examples of our customers. Clear Choice Dental is actually based in Colorado, and they are using our product for CCPA compliance. Similarly, EF Education, based in UK, this particular unit, using us for GDPR compliance for consent and stuff like that. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Puneet for introduction.
Hi, my name is Puneet. I'm the founder and CEO of Fit for Privacy. And Saurabh, thanks for having me, and everyone else, thanks for joining. So we are a company which provides consultancy and training on privacy matters, and we also have a podcast. So we help you from training, consulting, strategy, and its implementation, all in context of privacy. I think that'll be in short what I would say about myself. Of course, it can continue for a few days, but let's leave it at that.
All right. Thank you so much, Puneet. So as I mentioned, this particular conversation, our goal is to share an informed perspective. Like I was saying, there are folks who talk about privacy and come from a very privacy background, professionals like Puneet, who represent DPOs, legal compliance, internal counsel, external consulting and counsel, all of that. And these folks are looking at regulations such as CCPA, CPRA, GDPR, LGPD, pick your favorite 4-letter acronym. And there are a lot of these folks who are looking at these and articulating policies and security requirements and privacy requirements and maybe InfoSec related policies. All of that's happening in this one space within organizations. And then there are people like me who are on the technology side of this. And we look at these requirements and we are trying to map it to systems and to data and to processes and figuring out how do we take these requirements, which as a technologist sometimes seems abstract, may seem high level, and how do I translate it into real tangible solutions and features within the Salesforce products or whatever other products you may have. So our intention here is to really do a sort of a blend of the two. Puneet will talk about a lot of these things from a privacy perspective, like what does CPRA bring in to the fold, and what are things that you should consider if you're looking at if your organization is looking at CPRA compliance, or if your clients are looking for that. And then I'm going to talk about it from a solutions and technology perspective, and what can you do specifically on the Salesforce platform, which has a lot of new features to support privacy in the last 3-4 years. So that's our intention. We would encourage you, if you have questions, to please type them in the chat here, and then we will take a look at them as we get to the end of this presentation. But if you're a privacy person, know that this has a fair amount of privacy related component and perspective from a seasoned DPO, Puneet. And if you are a technology person, specifically from a Salesforce perspective, then know that we're going to talk a lot about very specific features. So bear with us as we go through this, and I really hope you find it useful. Very excited to do this. All right. With that, a quick overview of the agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about what is CPRA, what really does it bring in addition to CCPA, and how is it different from, for example, GDPR. And then we will talk about obligations under CPRA, like a general overview, and then really dive, bit by bit into some of the key aspects of it from an operationalizing perspective. So if your organization needs to comply, what are those requirements? What do they look like at a high level? What do they look like from a systems perspective within your Salesforce org? And then we will do the Q&A. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Puneet. Take it away.
Oh, thanks, Saurabh. So the question is, what is CPRA? I mean, the simple answer is CPRA is California's Privacy Right Act of 2020. And you'll say, what did I learn? Well, there's an interesting story around it. How was the CCPA or even CPRA born? Well, California wanted to pass its own privacy law. And then in California, you can do via two routes. One is the legislative route. You can pass a legislation. The second is via the ballot. Now, if you do it through a legislation, it's quicker, but then you have to make it lightweight. And then what happened is there's this consumer act, forum in California, and they wanted a legislation. So what the government did is they passed what we call known as CCPA, California Consumer Protection Act. And then this had to be amended later on, and that became CPRA. So the first thing first, CCPA and CPRA both are here to stay. Maybe we can move to the next slide. And the fact is the CCPA came into effect 2 years ago, and CPRA comes into effect 1st of January 2023. So these are two different acts doing the same thing. Sometimes we ask, is CPRA going to replace CCPA? Well, that's not the scope. CCPA will remain. CPRA adds a few more elements, adds a few more things onto CCPA, makes it much more comprehensive, makes it much more relevant. And then it also sets the standard further in terms of how do companies handle privacy matters, how do consumers exercise their privacy rights, because here we are talking about adding a few more rights. So a few dates you need to keep in mind. January 1, 2023. That's the date you need to be compliant with CPRA. What are the compliant elements? We come to that in a moment. As of the CCPA, it has already been in effect since January 1, 2020. The other thing is there's a slight change in the scope of CCPA and CCPRA. CCPA was for 25 million and above gross revenue and 50,000 consumers in California, and derives more than 50% of annual revenue from sale of personal data. While when we look at the CPRA, you buy, sell personal information of 100,000 and more Californian residents, a little bit higher bar, and derives 50% or more annual revenue from sharing, so not selling, sharing Californian personal information. I'll come to a little bit of more obligations on CPRA in a moment, but let's also answer the other question head on in the next slide. That is this same as GDPR, or is this a subset of GDPR? That's the question we usually ask. Well, the simple thing is GDPR is a framework legislation of Europe, and it is, as we expect from a framework, very holistic. If we combine CCPA and CPRA, we can say it's comparable to GDPR. So CPRA takes some elements of GDPR which were not there in CCPA and adds on to CCPA. So the way you have to look at GDPR, CCPA, CPRA in short, too many R's and too many C's, but the GDPR is a framework legislation of Europe. CCPA and CPRA combined make it the GDPR for California. That's in short. And if we go into the next slide, what we will see is different requirements that are coming into effect from CPRA. What will happen in next half an hour or so is I will first now walk you through all these 9 requirements at a broad level. And then with Saurabh, we will go into each requirement. I will talk about the requirement per se, the legal requirement, and Saurabh will talk about how do we make it a reality into your ecosystem, into your Salesforce ecosystem in your organization. But let's see what has changed. So first thing is under CCPA, there was no definition of sensitive data. So I will keep referring CCPA so that you know what is being added. But the CPRA has added a definition called sensitive data, which includes social security numbers, driver's license, and so on and so forth. We'll come to that in a minute. The other aspect is around the individual rights. It adds new rights. So CCPA gave you the right, or if you are the individual, you are the subject, right to know and access, right to delete, right to opt out, non-discrimination, and data portability. And if you remember, GDPR has some 8 rights or 7 based on whom you talk to. And then CPRA now adds the right to rectification and correction, that is same as right to modification as it was in GDPR, right to opt out of cross-context behavioral advertising, right to limit and disclose, limit use and disclosure of sensitive personal data, which is similar to right to restrict, and right to opt out of usage from automated decision making, which is again similar to GDPR. So if you look at it in different way, CCPA provided some rights, CPRA provides some rights, and combined you have rights equivalent of GDPR. Another thing is usage of de-identified data. There also CCPA and CPRA differ. What CPRA does is it defines anonymous, de-identified, pseudonymized, and aggregated data relating elements, which were slightly different in CCPA. Then when we look at the vendor contracts, in contracting, CCPA had, and I'm going a little bit too fast because my assumption is CCPA is something you know, GDPR is something you know, and you are here to understand CPRA at a broad level. So CCPA had defined business to third party, service provider, and person who is not a third party. CPRA takes it one level further. It includes into scope monitoring and of compliance contracts, that is same as GDPR's vendor monitoring obligation. It also defines sub-processor obligations and combination of personal information, that is taking it one step further. Risk assessments, we know GDPR has data protection impact assessments. CCPA did not have an equivalent, and now CPRA introduces that. Same way enforcement, we talked about it, comes from 1st of January 2023, but enforcement is also about the fact, what is the fine? So there, the CCPA and CPRA, they go a little bit deep. If you recall, CCPA had fines of 7,500 per intentional violation. Here, the fine is also on damages per incident. So individual has the right to ask damage per incident, which is significant because it sounds little, $100 to $750. What is it? But imagine 1 million customers and you have 100 million, and that is significant amount of. Then there are some exemptions. That's also important to talk about. When we say exemptions, de-identified or aggregated data, or if you are governed by HIPAA, this doesn't apply. And then a few more exemptions. And I did not talk about the right to action, which has also been extended. It was there in CCPA, but now you have the right to action in breach of email and password, or even security questions. So if you're in the security field and you need to make sure that personal data is protected, email and password is protected, that is now right to action under CPRA, and you can make sure that you exercise that. We've talked about applicability, so sort of let's get into the details of which requirement and how do we fulfill it. And before that, with this, I would like to ask you a question on saying, so if we go to the next slide so that people can see the questions. So do you think you need to take action if you're already in compliance with EU GDPR and CCPA? Because I like to handle that question upfront before we get there. So maybe in the chat, you can help us. What's your view? Say yes, no, maybe. That'll be a fair answer. What's your view? Imagine you have done the EU GDPR actions. Imagine you've done CCPA actions. Do you need to take action for CPRA? Let's see, what do you have to say? There are a few yeses coming along. Okay, so without much ado and trying to push everyone who's not very keen on, and there's a maybe with very good characters, and I think that's a good answer as well. So someone wants to protect the maybe itself. That's a good idea. Cutting a long story short, the simple answer is, and a lawyer's answer is, it depends. It depends on how did you structure your implementation. If you went for an international approach and probably implemented GDPR as a standard, then it's a matter of assessing what's the gap and fixing that gap. If you took a state-wise applicability and you only implemented CCPA and nothing else, then congratulations, or not, maybe, depends how you see it, there's work to do. And if you didn't yet do the CCPA, again, you need to look at it if you are based in California. So short answer, there is work to do. How much? It depends on your situation. So let's look at what are the work or what are the actions you can do and how can you get compliant, especially if you are in the Salesforce ecosystem. So if we look forward on the next slide, what we are talking about now is operationalizing CPRA. If there are any questions around the CCPA, CPRA, or GDPR, you can ask them now. Of course, we will answer them later, but we move into what we call operationalization. So let's move into the first requirement, and that is, what is sensitive personal information? As I said, in CCPA, this was not defined. Now what we've added is a new category which talks about government IDs, financial information, geolocations, race, religion, union membership, communications, genetics, biometrics, health and sexual consideration or orientation. When I read it, apart from finances, it's very similar to what we call as EU GDPR. If you implemented it, add finances. If you didn't, let's talk about what do you do. So Saurabh, what do we do if we have to implement this sensitive personal information requirement?
Thank you, Puneet. That was a great overview. So yes, so let's talk about the technology part of it, right? CPRA requires that we safeguard and protect this sensitive personal information. And the first step to that is actually to identify where all do you have it. And that's the part where you need to inventorize the information inside your Salesforce org, as well as other systems. Particularly around Salesforce, Salesforce has added support for data classification fields, which is something that is in your Salesforce org today. I'll show you a screenshot in a minute. And essentially the idea here is that you can apply data sensitivity at your field and object level, right? So I can say that the email field on the contact object, we consider it confidential, and these are the compliance categorizations that would apply to it. And what this really helps you do is that if you're working with vendors that have built tools that are aware of these things, then you can apply appropriate policies for access, for storage, for secure disposal, as in case of a retention or something like that. We have a couple of different products, and we have actually started building support for this across all of their portfolio, so that our clients that have tagged their information with data sensitivity level and compliance categorization can then leverage our tools. And then you can have a policy which says, okay, I have an ex-customer, or any record I have of theirs which has fields that have confidential sensitivity level, I don't want to keep that information after 5 years, or whatever your retention policies. That's an example, right? So we have now our customers were asking to use this. If you come from a security background, a privacy background, this is a very tangible way to make policies, because you're mapping of inventory to the Salesforce data classification or metadata for the technology folks on the call. This is a very direct connection into defining how a particular element of data should be treated. And again, this, like I said, this is out of the box in your Salesforce org today. Salesforce introduced this a couple of years ago, and the intention behind this is you're now tagging your data with this kind of sensitive information. So what do we do in this particular space is you could run our product for personal data discovery, click a button and essentially scan your entire org and generate out this data inventory. So for every object, all the fields, do they carry PII information? How many of them are populated? A lot of that kind of information. And then what you can do is you can work internally within your various groups to determine who owns this information. Who owns contact information? Is it marketing? Who owns orders? Is it finance? And then what are the kind of policies do you need based on the nature of the information? Is it sensitive? Is it information that is relevant from a GDPR perspective, from a CCP or a CPRA perspective, and things like that? So that's on the on this particular area of sensitive personal information. I will turn it over to Puneet to talk about the next topic from a privacy perspective. Go ahead, Puneet.
I think before we go into that, the data classification, even for the GDPR or CCPA, the right way of doing it is that you implement classification at field level, as we've been showing it on this slide. So take a field, mark it, is it confidential, restricted, and all that, define those rules based on that, what needs to happen, and also look at what are you applying, which legislation or how are you applying it. So data classification is an important element, irrespective of whether it's CPRA, CCPA, or GDPR. Of course, we shared with you that the CPRA did not talk about sensitive information, but still, if you want to effectively manage your data, which is essential to managing privacy or privacy compliance, you need to classify your data, and this is a must.
Really good point. And I'm going to say, I should have added a little bit more to it just beyond CPRA. It's just great. It's good data governance, right? The fact that, you are able to tag all of this information enables a lot of folks downstream, particularly technologists like us, to be able to then leverage this classification and apply it across policies, across solutions, across integrations, across how this data needs to be treated throughout its entire life cycle. I would be very curious if anyone has questions on this. This is a feature that I've seen Salesforce has offered it for many, many years, but I've not seen a lot of customers actually use it. And one of the things about this that's really cool is you can actually do a lot of this data tagging externally in Excel or Google spreadsheets or something, and then you can upload this in bulk. So you don't have to go one by one and do it here. And what we are doing is we are essentially collecting all of that and all your existing metadata. So you have 200, 300 custom objects, maybe 500 of them, with hundreds of fields on them. So you generate basically thousands of records, and we can automatically generate all that and inventorize it. Great for DPIAs, great for, audit compliance requirements under various laws. So with that, I will go to the next one here. Take it away, please, Puneet.
So the next one is about opt-out and profiling. So the GDPR, if you recall, has the right to opt out of automated decision-making. It is exactly the same. If a company is dealing with or is processing your personal data for automated decision-making, such as profiling, for example, you are processing the credit score of a person. Now, if your application is rejected automatically and you happen to go to another bank, and if that credit information has been recorded, you are going to be penalized, even though it was an automated decision making. So in such circumstances, you can ask for a manual intervention. But here, it has also consideration for minors. So this is the new addition that we have in CPRA. And the question then becomes is, how do you implement it? Because in the modern world, we want to go for more and more automation. And here we are saying opting out of automation. So it's not contradictory, but it's protecting the right of individual. That is, if you believe this automated decision-making is going to impact me as a person and my chances in terms of privacy or any other results I want to have, you need to have the option to come in. I give you a very simple example. A few months ago, in one of the big 3 or big 5, as we call them, I had lost my password. And I needed to establish it. And I had forgotten my password, my security question, my everything. And then the automated system was always saying, no, you cannot get your password. But then I saw a little bit, would you like a manual intervention? And I said, wow, yes, I do need it. And that's where this right comes in. When all the automated decision-making has failed or succeeded or whatever, I would like a manual intervention to supersede on what is happening automated. So let's see, how do we implement it, or how do we record this opt-out of automated decision making, especially when data is being shared with third parties as well.
Thank you so much, Puneet. Really great example. Can everyone please go on mute? That way we don't get background noise. Thank you. So yeah, so basically the idea for opt-out in particular is you're able to record that. And this extends, way beyond just automated processing from a systems perspective. Salesforce has actually done a lot of work on the platform. So if your Salesforce org today has, like, I forget, 16 or 20 data privacy objects specific to consent management. And the intention is not only to store system level consent, such as, don't do profiling on my data, don't do system level processing, don't run artificial intelligence, things like that, but also just general opt-in, opt-out management. Send me an SMS. If you're a bank, send me an SMS for my account updates, but send me an email for promotion or marketing or newsletter. Don't send me an SMS. So a lot of granularity on how consents are managed, how opt-in, opt-out are managed. The other thing that is very relevant to it is almost every large organization has Salesforce, and then they have a marketing technology, right? You may have Marketing Cloud, Pardot, Marketo, Eloqua, MailChimp, or something else like that. And these consents need to be automated so that you are respecting it not only inside your CRM system for some salesperson or for a call center to take a call or make a call, but you're also respecting these from your marketing outreach perspective as you're doing more and more digital marketing, particularly with with COVID in the last 2 years. A vast majority of businesses had to just switch overnight to digital, e-commerce and digital marketing and outreach, and consent and consumer communication preferences have become even more important. So you can easily manage these opt-outs with the objects that Salesforce provides. This is a smaller view of it just because it's such a big view, I couldn't put it all here. But the key objects that Salesforce provides is one of them is called individual, and which basically acts as the top level object for your leads, for your contacts, for your users. And then individual in turn can map to consent objects called contact point type consent, communication subscription consent, so on and so forth. So the good news is Salesforce provides you with a very robust data model to manage all those things. The bad news is there is not any automation around it. So if you need the automation, you need to either build it yourself, or now you can get it with Salesforce's Customer 360 that's coming out that has some of these features. We also solve this problem. We've built our consent and communication preference management on top of this structure that you're looking at here. And the intention is that for a given contact, you are able to now have granular preferences, and you're also able to have system level preferences like what Puneet was describing earlier. Do not apply machine-based, do not apply systems to my data, whether it's AI, profiling, or things like that. And then from a communication and consent management perspective, you also have various channels of outreach that you may use and various purposes for which you are using. And so what we are doing is we are automating all of this, how we create individuals, how these consents are kept, and all the Salesforce's data model is really great because all of these consents are fully auditable. They have a start date and end date, how they were obtained, what kind of channel were they obtained on, and all of that. And we pull all of that together. Puneet, anything you'd like to add on this before we move on?
No, I think the image that you put in is self-explanatory. Consent needs to be granular and as granular as possible. So if you see the screen, we are talking about candidate support, phone, email, and SMS, and you can opt in or opt out at that level. So the more options you give, the more user-friendly you become.
True. And with, as with digital, we are all like bombarded constantly with messaging. And I think a lot of, tech savvy brands understand how important it is for their marketing success to have very granular consent and preference management, because at the end of the day, you are respecting your end customer, user, constituent, student, patient, whatever business you are in, you are respecting your end consumers' wishes with a robust consent management. So, we have a product on App Exchange that does all of the things that we're talking about for data inventory, portability, RTBF, consent, retention, etc. You can take a look at it if you like, and we'll share the links in the chat as we go along. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Puneet again.
So RTBF sounds like more or less an FM channel, but no, that's not the case. It's called right to be forgotten, or sometimes called right to delete or right to erasure. Essentially, if you remember some of the court cases in Europe, and there has been an interesting discussion about what happens to my data when it's no longer needed. And that's where right to delete comes in. Even if the company is not bringing in, you go in and say, can you delete my data? Well, that's still, of course, a challenge. But the bigger challenge is that the law or the right says that you must delete this or notify even the third parties with whom the data has been shared. And that's where the complexity comes in. First, you need to find and delete yourself. And then you need to notify. That means you need to have a list of where all did you share this data, notify them. And thankfully, you don't need to follow up. But that's already a big challenge. Who did you send your data to? Because data is flowing like anything, because data is just a commodity. And that's where right to delete becomes challenging, inside as well as outside of your organization. How do you do it? Do you delete it? Do you anonymize it? What is the retention period? Is there a legal hold? All those questions need to be handled here. But while those questions are handled from business standpoint, from technology standpoint, I think Saurabh, you can explain us how this can be enabled.
Absolutely. So, right to delete has been around, and it's one of the most talked about part of GDPR, CCPA. Like, a lot of our customers were very concerned about it, and rightfully so. Within Salesforce, it's easy to say, yeah, I can go in and delete a record, but there is a ton of objects that have special behaviors. So if you have leads that have been converted to a contact and you delete the contact, the converted lead record doesn't go away. It's still sitting in your org somewhere, maybe hidden from plain view, but it's there. Cases, case comments, users, files, field history, email history, archive activity, all of these objects have unique behaviors. So, and the other part of this is a lot of businesses really want non-personal information. So if you ran a campaign and you got a bunch of leads and you have campaign member data, your campaign analytics wants to look at this information. So now Saurabh, who attended your event, asks that his information be deleted. That is fine. You need to respect Saurabh's right to delete request. But at the same time, you want the value that is coming out of non-personal information, such as what type of event was it, where was it held, what channel did we get through, how did Saurabh register. So what a lot of businesses do is instead of deleting, they want to anonymize personal information and de-identify those records of any PII in it. The idea of data anonymization is considered valid under GDPR, CPRA, CCPA, pretty much every regulation in the world. And that's what, one of the key things that a lot of our customers do. They delete a lot of information that they don't care about, like chatter, files, field history, stuff like that. And then they anonymize other set of information so that they are still able to run reports on it. They're able to do analytics on it and things like that. The other thing that's really interesting about that with CPRA, so CCPA had right to delete. What has happened with CPRA is that not only are organizations required to remove information from their systems, they're also required to coordinate with other third parties, their partners, vendors, whoever, with whom this data was shared. That's the part where if you are using Salesforce, you not only need to do RTBF internally, but you also need to make an outbound call or integrate in some shape or form with your major vendors. So if you are an e-commerce business and you integrate with FedEx or some other shipping entity, you may need to do some sort of integration with them. You may need to do it with your marketing partners and so on and so forth. And what you need is, and vice versa, right? They may need to integrate with you. So you need to offer some sort of APIs for those partners to make similar requests to you if you are a vendor to someone. And that's the kind of stuff that a lot of our customers would like to do. and we enable doing it. So we have what we call a PrivSec request, so which is for privacy and security, and our PrivSec requests support RTBF. So if you get a right to be forgotten request, we will pull all the associated records for that person from all kind of object standard, custom managed package, and we will create this entire trail, and then we will either delete them or we will mask them, whatever the business requirement is. We also have native APIs written in Salesforce Apex and hosted in your Salesforce org, so that you can easily integrate with your partners, vendors, others where you need to do this. Anything on this, Puneet, that you would like to add for right to be forgotten?
No, I think you covered the element of structured and unstructured data, and also the third-party aspect, because when we look at right to deletion, you'll usually look at the databases and say that's where we need to delete. Well, that's obviously true, but you also need to look at email history, SharePoints, and everywhere, and which is a bigger challenge because you're not able to scan that data. So you do need to look at the unstructured data, and more importantly, what CPRA brings in the right to be forgotten is the aspect of informing or notifying the third parties. So that's something which you can do easily if you have maintained an inventory of where the data is flowing or having good mapping of data.
Cool. All right. Moving on. If there are questions, please do post in the chat. So right to data portability. Go ahead, Puneet.
Sure. So if you remember GDPR, the two rights that were most talked about were right to be forgotten and right to data portability. Well, nothing new as far as we are concerned, because when we look at right to data portability has been there for a few years, especially in the telecom industry. Like when you say, I switch my provider from one to another one, your mobile number gets ported, and that is essentially what we are talking about, data portability. You not only get your mobile number ported, but you also want your records, that is your name, your identity, your address, and everything ported in one shot. Well, telecom has been implementing it, of course, at a slightly trimmed down version. What GDPR has made it is, it should be done extensively. And that's what now CCPA adds it, saying data portability requirements are to be implemented, and implemented exactly like what we say in GDPR. That is, one, it should be machine readable, and two, it should be provided either to the individual or to a third party where the person wants to move. And that's an easy thing. It's a customer friendly thing. You shouldn't look at it as a privacy compliance thing. This is customer friendliness, because if you are able to port data, yes, a few customers will go away, but many or equivalent number can at least come to you as well, because they will also come in and saying, move my insurance record, move my banking record, and you don't need to identify, hopefully not identify them or have an extensive KYC mechanism to take care of. So that's essentially right to data portability.
True. And one of the things that's really interesting for portability is, within Salesforce, you now need to pull all the information, right, for a person. So I'm a contact, maybe you'll pull all the cases related to me, all the assets, the case history, all of that, right? So that's a lot of information. So, what we did is we very much like right to be forgotten, build this whole parent, child, grandchild, like multiple levels of it. You can go 6, 7, 8, 9 levels, pull all of this information together. And then if an individual requests it, maybe they want a CSV, comma separated file or a PDF, or if you're doing machine to machine, which is actually a CPRA requirement now that businesses very technically feasible should also allow transmitting one of these formats. And we've added support for JSON, which is a integration data exchange format. And the idea is that, if you are, I'm just making this up, you are MasterCard and, someone wants some portability to Visa, and then you now have the ability to push this information. I'm just using that as an example of, two very large players where, customers may be moving from one to another. So that's kind of one of the things that, we do for our customers. Again, same sort of approach. We have this PrivSec request object. We get a portability request. We will pull all the related information. We will generate out the appropriate file format that our customers need. And again, they're supported by APIs. You can send it. You can receive an API, request of this from a third-party system, your website, some form that you have, if you have a OneTrust or some other system, we integrate with all of them for portability, right, to be forgotten, things like that. Moving on. Oops, I think I had the same request. Okay, so this is kind of the detailed view of that. All right, and again, we actually, now we're working with some really large customers that have many Salesforce orgs between 30 to 50. And what they want to do is they globally want to do this, right, to be forgotten, or portability across these orgs. So we've just recently introduced a product for multi-org privacy and security. We affectionately call it MOPS Hub. And the idea of MOPS Hub is that, you are able to send one request to your hub org, and then it gets broadcasted out to all of these orgs, and you can execute, right, to be forgotten requests, data portability requests, get some information back. And it's really like, it's a really elegant way, particularly for very large organizations where like a full-blown master data management has still not happened. And this is, this product enables you to kind of solve that problem. All right, I'm going to pass it back to Puneet for reasonable security.
Well, the word says it all, reasonable security. Well, security is non-negotiable and there's no privacy without security. That's what we say. So the law usually, like GDPR says, your system should have resilience. That's a new term they introduced. And the CCPA says that reasonable security, or in fact does not even specifically say reasonable security, but if you read that, they say personal information should be protected, or you have a duty to implement and maintain reasonable security procedures and practices. Now, what is reasonable? The GDPR goes a little bit further, saying it should be best in class, it should be fit for purpose, it should also be relevant and necessary and in line with the proportionate measures as well. Proportionate meaning proportionate to cost, proportionate to the risk. And that is exactly the same thing you have to do in CCPA. Well, security, as you all know, in privacy laws is touched upon, is requested, is mentioned, but they don't go in so far as saying what exactly is to be done in security. Leave it with words reasonable, confidential, integrity, or sometimes saying proportionate measures. It's the same in CCPA. It's no different.
Yeah, really, a really good point. And my quick, 30-second on this is that I find a lot of these privacy laws very, very commonsensical, right? I mean, we need to have security, and that needs to be reasonable. So, if you're carrying health data, if you're carrying data that can put someone's life at risk, like we have one of our customers, Norwegian Refugee Council, and they are dealing with people in places where there is a lot of unrest. So they're now working in Ukraine, right? They work in Somalia, a lot of different places. And some of the information they have of the people that they're trying to help are, that information, if it gets leaked out, someone can die. I've not worked with any other business where it was that critical yet. And the security criteria for them is significantly different from someone who's selling, a B2C product, for example, right? And the intention here is to have enough reasonable amount of security. And how that translates into Salesforce is that, when you look at your sandboxes in Salesforce, the data that goes in there, if you have full copy, partial copy sandboxes, the data in it is going basically unmasked. It is as is, right? So if you have my information, my social security number, my health insurance, my other kind of asset information, my orientation, whatever kind of data you have on me, if you're a B2B customer, you may still have a lot of personal information about me because, the sales guy knows me really well. He knows my spouse's name, he knows my dog's name, so on and so forth. A lot of information about me may be in your Salesforce org, and it's going into your sandboxes. And you have third-party people accessing those sandboxes. You typically tend to have less stringent security measure because it's a sandbox. And so the idea here is that you can mask your sandbox data, and that allows you to protect your organization from breaches and fines and violations and such. So you can, the idea is that you have, here is contact information, here is sort of the, the masked version of it, like the emails are masked, and you want to do it really granularly. We do a lot of this. We actually are the fastest in the world for on-platform processing. We process about 99 million records in 24 hours, a lot of granularity. Fully automated, integrates with DevOps and stuff like that. And you can try Data Masker from Salesforce App Exchange today. It's a free product. You can definitely kick tires on it. It's, in my opinion, one of the easiest, lowest barrier to entry things to significantly improve the security and privacy of your product, of your customer data. So that's on this one. Here is a screenshot of that and a link to it that's also being shared by Rahul here. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Puneet again. Go ahead, Puneet.
So the most challenging or the most complex requirement, and which we say it's very difficult to implement, but there are three of those that we are talking about. One is data minimization. Well, the tendency of organizations is to collect as much as possible. There's even a cartoon saying, collect the data, we will see what do we have to do with it later. And the GDPR or the Ccpa and now the CPRA turned around saying, collect only the data that is strictly necessary. And that is data minimization. Then the other philosophy that organizations have had is, let's keep the data because more data, more power. Well, no, not more data, more power. The right data is the power. And there the GDPR or the CCPA or the CPRA now go a step further saying retention. That is, do not keep data any longer than necessary. Again, we can discuss about hours, about no longer than necessary. What does it mean? Just like the reasonable security. And the third element is purpose limitation. That is, you process personal data for what you collected for. No more, no less. Only more is the legal purposes. And that is again a challenge, because then we say there needs to be reasonably necessary and proportionate to achieve the purpose. What does it mean? And I know these are abstract requirements, and especially from technology oriented people, left brain people who look at 1, 2, 1, 0 and binary. And when the privacy experts come in and saying it depends, and they say, what do you mean by it depends, yes or no? And we say, no, it depends on what your context is. And that's a complicated requirement, but still you got to comply with these: the minimization, the retention, and purpose limitation. No easy way, but simple solutions are you tag, you classify, and you create policies and then reduce the data. But I will let Saurav explain how is he proposing from technology perspective to do it, because from law perspective, it depends and it's proportionate to the situation you are in. There's no straight answer in that context, at least.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I think data minimization I find as something that our customers struggle with the most. And it's primarily because data minimization is so much more about changing and improving your internal processes and re-engineering the intake of information, right? So if you have a lead registration form, you want to reduce the amount of information you're asking. If you are, if you have a button on your website someone can click to get a quote, right? You need to reduce the amount of information you're asking. Same for customer onboarding, opening service request, getting information from partners. If you're buying data from third parties, again, not a Europe problem, but definitely in the US, right? If you're buying it from a data exchange or somewhere, if you have integrated some of these tools that exist to bring in additional information to enrich the data that you already have, you now need to look at it in the perspective of reducing some of that so that it is consistent with the disclosures of why you asked for that information. This is one of the areas where I think CPRA has really done a lot more to bring parity with GDPR compared to CCPA. So from a technology perspective, first thing, process and data collection, right? Across the board, you want to look at it. Then the second is what we were talking earlier. You want to apply data classification that Salesforce offers. It's in your org, it exists today. You don't have to pay anything or buy anything new. Yes, it's an effort to do it, but what's great about doing it is if you do this now, then you can utilize tools that have the smarts to understand data classification, and then you can enforce very granular retention policies. So we do natively data retention on Salesforce, and we've actually integrated the data classification. So you can create a policy which is X customers, which have records that are populated on fields that are considered sensitive, mask them or delete them or whatever you'd like. And we are able to do that today for customers that have put data classification. So here is a look at, it's really a three-step process where you can identify the data that you want to retain, and apply a scheduling, and we do a lot of work under the hood to kind of make it happen across parent records, child, grandchild, like 6, 7, 8 levels of those, with master detail relationships with lookups. So if you're a technologist, hopefully this is making sense. This is definitely not an easy requirement to meet. If you are trying to solve this problem, I know this because I have solved it. But what I find is this is one of the easiest areas to get compliance in if you find the right technology solution. Data minimization, definitely much more harder because of the process implications of it. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Puneet again for audit and risk assessment. Go ahead, Puneet.
Now, that's another one which may seem abstract, but most of the privacy laws would say that you need to do regular assessments, risk assessments, vendor monitoring, and even an audit on an ongoing basis saying you are compliant with the law. While it may seem abstract, the fact of the matter is, if you get compliant, you run a project, maybe for 6 months, maybe for 5 years, or maybe for 2 years. What has happened is in those 6 months or 2 years, your business has changed. That means whatever you did for compliance needs to be relooked. And that's where these audits or risk assessments are very, very handy. Because if you keep running them every year, at least, or every alternate year, what it gives you is a view on the new gaps which have been created because the business has transformed. The business does not remain static. And so new areas are identified, new gaps are created, or new processes are there which have not been DPI'd, risk assessed, and so on. So if you do that, it allows you to protect your business. So while this seems like a nuisance, this seems like, why do we have to do these risk assessments or audit assessment, or it's a cost? Well, it's to your benefit because you don't want to be paying fines and you don't want to be having vulnerabilities on security. And that's where this requirement fits in. And if you can run a health check, if you can run a security audit, if you can run a privacy audit, or any risk assessment on an ongoing basis, it is in good interest of yours. Maybe Saurabh, you want to add on to that?
Absolutely. One of the things I absolutely loved about what Salesforce did is they introduced this health check. It's really simple. You go to your setup, really click a button, and it runs. It gives you fairly detailed outcome on what are the areas where things are not set up correctly. Where do you stand? And it's free. It's in your org. Click a button, run it, fix these issues. Because at the end of the day, this is all preventive maintenance, right? We have cyber threats that continue to rise. And these are things that we can do. If you look at Salesforce as a technology platform, its role in the organizations have completely changed in the last 10, 15, 20 years. This is not like a Rolodex on the cloud for me to just keep track of my contacts, right? Today, Salesforce drives a significant amount of digital transformation in organizations. And these are the things that allow your org to to be in the best state of its health that it can be. I cannot stress enough how useful and how simple this is to do, and I recommend it to every customer that I speak with. I really think that's it. The one thing I would add to this is when you look at compliance in general, whether it's for CPRA, GDPR, CCPA, PIPL, PIPEDA, whatever regulation, PDPB, LGBT. When you look at them, the thing that I've found is, as an enterprise architect, the idea is to look at the data lifecycle and to apply a holistic thinking from a systems perspective, because every requirement that when you talked about, every law that I have looked at and understood about, at the end of the day, these laws are regulators trying to make sure that, they're trying to catch up with technology, quite bluntly, right? Like we are trying to make sure that the groundswell of gather everybody's data and do whatever with it is limited. And when you're trying to do this, you want to look at it from that perspective. When you have lead registration forms, you're getting information from leads and contacts. You want to market to them respectfully. You want to market with permission, with their consent, communication preferences. Salesforce as a platform has invested in that space. You have all these objects. Salesforce doesn't charge you for the storage of consents and communication preferences. Basically, that's on the house. And all you need to do is have enough automation in this to be able to leverage it. Then you want to safeguard this information once you have it. So you have data retention, you're anonymizing it, you're automating a lot of secure disposal of data that you really don't need anymore. And from there, as you look at privacy right automation, someone's requesting these things, you automate it, so it's standardized, nothing falls through the cracks. You can have something as simple as a request intake form. We provide one. You can use communities. You may have other tools like OneTrust or Osano or others. Doesn't matter. Collect it somewhere, send it over to Salesforce, get it processed, fully automated. That's what like a ton of our customers do, these three things that I'm showing here. And finally, you want to safeguard this information. And this is one of those areas where I feel like most organizations, and I'm talking like really, really large, massive organizations, multi-billion-dollar Fortune, 100, 200, 500 organizations, and they have not fixed that either. This is one of those areas that I very strongly feel every customer should do it. We owe it to our end customers to make sure that our sandbox data is securely masked, and like you're not having accidental email blasts, you're not having other automation related things, you're not having data breaches. It's an incredibly expensive and embarrassing problem to have. There's really no reason to have it. We have a product on App Exchange that does it for free. Salesforce sells a data mask. You can pick any product to do this, but this is something you definitely want to address. And finally, if you have a very large enterprise, a bunch of different orgs, then you want to have a solution that helps you to apply, automate privacy rights and some of these things more sort of consistently across your orgs. Very typical if you have different product lines, pharma, you have, diabetic, cancer, different product lines, different orgs, but you may have it by different region. You may have it by, commercial lending, retail, in banking or FinServ, whatever your nuances of business are, you want to look at these things and apply a holistic thinking of how these problems are going to be solved. I think that's really what I have, my perspective on this. Puneet, if you want to add something, and if someone has a question, please type it in the chat or get off mute and please ask it. Feel free to ask. Go ahead, Puneet, if you want to add something in the meantime.
No, I think you mentioned it correctly. The holistic perspective is what you need to look at, whether it's CCPA, CPRA, or GDPR, or any privacy law for that matter. Do not look for short fixes. Look for a holistic long-term solution, and look for a solution which will help you across regions, across laws, and across systems. Because if you try to put in piecemeal solutions, in the long term, the cost would be higher, and you will have more challenges than solutions. So look at it from really long-term perspective, take a holistic view and fix it, starting with your policy, governance, systems, data, all at all layers of organization.
True. Very well said. I'm looking through the attendees here, and I'm curious to see if anyone has a question that we can answer. I know someone asked a question about PIPL in China. And Tracy, I kind of responded a little bit, and I think Kiran responded too. So I think PIPL and I think the equivalent law in Russia, those are the two that I know of that have data residency requirements. And actually, if you don't do what is known as a standard contractual clause, then by extension, GDPR also does apply some version of data residency requirements. And the solutions that I'm aware of is obviously Salesforce is now doing Hyperforce, which is where the idea is that you can have data residency and you can actually designate where you want your org to be and how that data is going to be stored in that particular geography. So that's there. I think in countries, another solution that does it. But outside of that, if you're looking for some of these other things like, the privacy right, automation, masking, consent, and all of those, because I know those elements are there in PIPL also for China. So, we solved some of those problems. Happy to kind of have a more detailed conversation on it if you like. Any other questions, any feedback? Was this useful? Are there areas that we should have covered that we didn't? I'm just going to randomly ask that question from people. Nicole, Ravina, Alara, any feedback on that?
I think there are a few comments in the chat that this has been helpful, and some of them have also said that they had their follow-up meeting. In fact, there's also a comment recently, very thorough and explained well, and a thank you note from some people. So I think overall, very useful for people from what we hear and what we see on the comments. And what I would say is thank you so much for turning up, because these webinars that we do together, they are helpful only if you show up, and it's your support that makes us do this again and again.
True, I agree. And we'll share the recording with everyone. We'll just, I think, share a link on LinkedIn. Appreciate you joining us. Please do follow our company pages if you'd like. We are in cloud compliance and fit for privacy. So yeah. I'm reading the comment. Appreciate the inclusion of marketing platform. Absolutely. You're welcome, Ben and Ray. Cool. You're welcome, Nikita. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if there are no questions, I think we are going to conclude this session then.
Thank you so much, everyone.
I'm reading this tokenized sending and encryption and field encryption address. Yeah, Lara, I have read about that, and I get that, but I think the challenge I find, Lara, between like Salesforce and I hope I'm saying your name right, by the way. The challenge I find when you look at Salesforce and like Marketing Cloud or Pardot or any marketing technology is when you think of the other portions like consent and some of those. That's where it gets hard, because Marketing Cloud would have its own unsubscribe that doesn't connect back to consent management. Same is true for like literally any marketing platform today. So I think consent in particular, I find a lot of challenges around, and the tokenized sending and encryption is good because it does keep stuff secure within the Marketing Cloud environment. But when you think about people trying to manage their sort of consent and preferences, there is a gap that continues to exist in the enterprises, in my opinion.
Yeah, there definitely is, but it can be fixed if both or all platforms are taken into account, right? So, you can have you have a preference center, a default preference center that comes with a Pardot or a Marketing Cloud, and you can build a custom preference center with both platforms. At least from a security perspective, the databases can be encrypted at rest, but once you start doing tokenized sending, it gets harder for the people who are using the marketing platform to see what they're doing, to make sure that they've picked the right audience. Because if you have field encryption in the marketing cloud platform, then you can query something and get a list, but you don't see what the information is. So usually we'll do like an encryption of the backend database. But to your point about preference centers, Marketing Cloud can write directly to objects in Sales Cloud via its proprietary AMP script JavaScript, as well as journey builder activities. And I think what happens is, depending on the order in which the products were purchased, one product or another is set up to manage some kind of preferences, and then everyone thinks that this other product is going to manage the mobile and the email preferences, not realizing that when you have like a call center in a service cloud, all of that stuff needs to be connected. But the custom preference centers in the cloud pages of Web Studio in Marketing Cloud can use proprietary JavaScript called AMP script to directly update what's happening in the CRM, and also at the same time save that information to its own subscription tables. So as long as the conversation is had as to where it needs to go and how often it needs to be updated, You know, you can use that preference center in the Marketing Cloud to update workplaces. It can also make API calls, right? Or connect to MuleSoft, right? From the web page. It's the only way you can get an outbound call from Marketing Cloud. Or you use the Journey Builder, like you collect the preferences in the table in Marketing Cloud, fire it off in a Journey Builder, use update object to update whatever's going on in the CRM. And if there's data that we need to keep secure or a change in a secured field, you know, all of that can be managed as well. It's just complicated. What is it?
Yeah, I think that kind of hits the nail on the head. It's complicated. So what we actually do is we, you know, for the reason that you mentioned earlier, right? Like you may have a bunch of different applications or different ways you're sending out stuff, right? You may have Twilio for SMS, you may have Marketing Cloud for some other stuff, you may have other social media related platforms. What's happening with most businesses is their MarTech stack has like really proliferated, at least in the last 2 years, specifically because of COVID. And so what's happened, like the challenge for enterprises is, where do I manage my consent, right? Do I master it in Salesforce, the CRM? Do I master it in Marketing Cloud? Do I master it? Where do I do it? And what we found was, you know, when we did a lot of research initially, and what we found is that it's always a challenge to put it in a marketing technology, because by design, a lot of marketing technologies are limited to marketing. So if you look at the evolution of the enterprise, the one master source for customer interaction happens to be Salesforce, right? The core Sales Cloud, Service Cloud platform. So what we basically designed our entire offering so that we could leverage the individual object, contact point, type, consent, like all these, you know, what 16, 20 plus object that Salesforce has now introduced. And that is a significantly robust model. And what we then do is we are able to synchronize these to Marketing Cloud, Pardot, or others. But to your point on, you know, bringing an unsubscribe back, and you're spot on, like JavaScript, or there is some custom code that needs to be written on that specific platform. When I think of it from a solution perspective, you know, you are looking at, we want to support Marketing Cloud, Pardot, Mailchimp, right? Marketo, Eloqua, so on and so forth. And so it becomes really hard to kind of look at point solutions within, you know, each of those areas. So whether it's AMP script, JavaScript, something else, right? And that's why we were like, let's kind of, you know, bring it together inside Salesforce and offer like consent APIs, and the downstream marketing systems can call our APIs. So we have opt-in, opt-out, you know, create new consents, all of that stuff exposed as APIs. And that makes it easy for downstream systems to connect back. Like I have a customer that has, you know, their own mobile app, and they push these consent and preferences from that to AWS, and then from AWS they bring it into Salesforce, and we just have a REST endpoint exposed to them. Anyway, but I agree with you. This is one of those areas, you know, we could probably just do a webinar on.
I know we could talk all day, and I know we have to go, but I appreciate you bringing it up, and you know, I'll be sure to review, because one of the things that MarTech does well. Sorry, I moved the mic. One of the things that MarTech does well is it's usually the first to know that someone opted out, regardless.
Absolutely.
The spam feedback loop, right? And one of the things that non-MarTech people don't do well is realize how many federal fines exist for us reaching out to communicate to people who have asked us not to. And to your point, you know, you can have all kinds of duplicates across all kinds of systems, and how do we make sure that everyone's opted out within 15 days? So actually, I don't know how much you are going to go into this next time, but you might want to consider, since you're talking about security and data privacy, CTIA for SMS, and CAN spam. Right, those are the two, and that's state and federal. Because I see people get, you know, sending text messages past 8 p.m. commercial enterprise, non-transactional text messages, and that since you guys are all about security and privacy and compliance, that those might be things that you might want to include just in your presentation to make sure people consider them, because getting it into Salesforce doesn't work unless the person is also unsubscribed in the platform that's sending them the commercial communication anyway. Nobody wants to pay 100 grand, $1 million in federal fines. But this is a really great presentation, and I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was a great perspective. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I think we are a little bit over, but really enjoyed the dialogue. Please do connect with us on LinkedIn. I'd love to stay in touch. And if you have any other questions, any other feedback, happy to chat. All right, with that, I'll stop sharing. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day, good evening, good night, wherever you are. Bye-bye.